Hey everybody, Bryn here. Welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. I completely changed the setup. I wanted to make things just a little bit more relaxed. I was getting a lot in my head about these types of videos and was planning to record everything in the span of each tournament as one video. And I ended up spending about 3 months working on scripting this entire tournament and recording a lot of it, and I realized I just didn't like what was happening. So I'm just doing this off the cuff now. I think it will just be a better experience, and it'll just get me out of my head because I want to show these games, and it feels like that it's just in the back of my head that I haven't shown them yet. So let's get into it. I'm playing against Mark Plotkin, who is an international master from Canada. I'm also from Canada, of course. I just beat a national master in the previous round, so I'm looking forward to this one. And I talked with my coach at the time about what I really should look forward to playing against him. And my coach said that he plays a little bit of everything. And so I should probably look at the lines that I played the least or have the least experience in. And to me, this meant that I had to look at c4 and knight f3. And what would you guess? He actually played c4 in this game. So this was already off to a pretty good start for me. Um, the luck I had in this game was insane. So I, at the time, was studying the Semislav by Sam Shankland and also his sideline course. And that's exactly what happened here. One of the lines that I looked at that was in the course was this: c6, right? Knight f3, and then d5. So nothing unusual yet, but the whole point of this setup for black is that they're trying to transpose into a semi-Slav with d4. But of course white can avoid that, and white did. So e3 was played, and then knight to f6, and then knight to c3, and then e6, right? So I'm playing, again, my normal semi-Slav setup, so he could easily play d4. I feel like if he did, this game would turn out a lot different. But I got into a pretty good line. So queen to c2 is a pretty important move here that you can play to kind of avoid certain things now. You still want to allow transpositions with d4. There's not really a way you can prevent it, unless you play something like c5, but this seems a little bit silly. If you play knight b to d7, it's a little bit less flexible, and we'll see why. So bishop to d6, and now b3 was played. So I ended up castling here, which isn't the most amazing thing. There is another move that I could try, but we're going to see it on this next move. Bishop to d2, b2. So I didn't play knight bd2 or bd7 for a very specific reason, and that's because in this position, since they didn't take or since they didn't play d4, it gives me the ability to play e5, which is what I do. Now, after e5, white is able to now take on d5. And this is a problem and a good thing for black. So after c takes on d5, the common move here is to play knight to b5, trying to get the bishop pair. I can't move away because I lose the e5 pawn. But now we're going to enter some territory where black gets very dynamic and has a pretty good position because of it. So knight to c6, knight takes on d6, queen takes on d6, and then d4. So black honestly would be in a lot of trouble if they didn't have the next few types of moves or a couple of moves. So knight to e4 was recommended in the course. And the reason why knight e4 is pretty strong is we're actually going to be giving up the d pawn. If we end up taking something like this, after knight takes d4, for example, let's just take again. They have this square under control. It's going to be very hard for us to get rid of our isolated pawn. So we could easily say that white has some sort of advantage here, which is not ideal. But after knight to e4, the idea is after we give up the pawn, we have queen b4 check. And it turns out here, we're going to be winning back our pawn by force, but it's not necessarily going to be the e5 pawn. So white has to be a little bit careful. After knight to d2, which is the only realistic move to play here, anything else just loses, we just keep turning up the heat with bishop to f5. So the point of bishop to f5 is now we're threatening knight to g3. And knight to g3 is incredibly annoying. We're also incredibly close to playing moves like rook f to c8 with moves like knight to d4 on the way. But the main threat here is knight to g3. But again, they don't really have time for something like queen c1 because after rook f to c8 or rook a to c8, there's just too much pressure here. There's nothing really for them to do. They're already losing. So they actually have to find this move a3. And this forces an endgame, and this is where we get our pawn back. After queen takes d2, knight takes d2, and king takes d2, we actually have the funky move knight to a5. This is kind of necessary. The whole point here is that we're actually trying to take the b3 pawn, and we're trying to argue that they have these doubled e pawns, and it's not really that great. We're actually happy to trade our e pawn for their b pawn because this one blocks their bishop in a little bit, which is kind of important, but also it's not all bad for white, and it's not all great for white either. So when we take this pawn, we also have a pretty decent initiative, at least for the next couple of moves, with moves like rook f to c8 coming. But we also have this isolated d pawn. So black probably is slightly preferred, but not much more than that. The move here is bishop to d3. And this is a very unusual one. My opponent did not see this. I remember talking to him after he thought this wasn't playable. I think something like that. I could be misremembering. But this is the correct move. He ended up playing rook to d1. But the reason why bishop d3 is so strong is because after knight takes on b3, they have king c3. And now all of a sudden, what's going to happen is we should probably play rook to c8, or we could take on d3. Either way, let's just say we take on d3. They actually need to be careful here, right? They need to take here. It looks like this move is maybe a thing, but obviously when you see knight takes a1, it's not, right? So it's pretty obvious that they need to take here. But the other thing that it sets up is that on king c3 and then taking on a1, they can actually take on a5 or f5 here, which is the easy thing to miss, I think. And the whole point here is that we don't have rook f to c8, and this knight therefore will be lost. So g6, an easy way to play it is something like bishop to h3 even, where, yeah, they have to play rook to c8. We can take it, and king to d4. White gets way more than enough activity for all this. Of course, white's not winning, but this is a very, very nice position, I'd say, for white, just because of how active they are. And this knight is still, like, it's not going to be trapped now, but there's some problems with it. So again, this is just, yeah, all not ideal. So rook to d1 was played. And I was not really sure what I should do here. So I was considering knight takes b3 and rook f to c8. But I ended up playing knight takes b3. And I feel like this is just a bit too early. It kind of cashes in. Where, yeah, now all of a sudden they do get that attack on the d-pawn, which I wasn't really too happy about. But if I play with something like rook f to c8 instead, and then they play king to e1, now I have rook to c2. And this is obviously quite nice. But yeah, I just remember being a little bit nervous, like if I don't get my pawn back right away, if there's something that can happen. Realistically, I don't see anything too punishing. Like, for example, b4, we have knight b3 check and rook to c2 with check, with just a completely dominant position. But of course, I think it was seeing ghosts a bit. So knight takes b3, I decided to cash in. And this also has the point of, if king c3, this is just losing because rook f to c8 check, and they can't take because of bishop to c2, winning the rook. But if they keep pushing forward, then a5, they have to keep making choices. If they take on b3, then again, bishop c2. And if king a4, then there's moves like knight c5, and this actually ends up in mate with bishop to d7 check, king b6, knight a4 check. I didn't calculate all of this. It just felt like there had to be something, though, in bishop c6 check. I wasn't able to calculate like past here, I think, in the game, something around here. I was like, there's got to be a checkmate, so I'll just find it out then. So yeah, I wasn't too worried. But this was kind of what I was like looking down when I was calculating knight takes b3. But yeah, king e1 attacks the d pawn, and I realized that this is kind of a problem because I want to play rook f to c8 to take advantage of the second rank, but I mean they take on d5, and that's not ideal. So I decided to play a pretty passive move, just saying, okay, you know what, this is probably equal. It feels about equal. So I will just make my position too solid to crack. This is an international master. Maybe he'll push too hard. So I play a move that looks a little funky, bishop e6, but this is my only weakness. And if he can't attack it, then I should be okay. But then he finds a really cool idea. So bishop to d3. I mean, developing isn't really that crazy. I play rook up to c8. And then he plays bishop to b1. And I was like, oh no. He already has a way to target my d5 pawn. He's going to go to a2. So now that's what I'm looking out for. I play knight to c5. He plays king to e2 here. And then knight to a4. So I'm just rerouting, trying to get this bishop off the board. My idea is that this would just be too solid if I end up getting to take that bishop. And obviously, if it's opposite color bishops, I still feel like this is pretty good. Probably not a good mindset to go in this hoping for a draw when I probably had a slightly better position. But I feel like after knight b3 and king e1, when I saw that d5 was attacked, it felt like my advantage kind of dissipated. So bishop to d4 was played. I played knight c3 check. He's forced to take. I recapture. And then rook to d3, protecting the a3 pawn. So I go rook a to c8. He goes king to d2. And then I go rook 3 to c5. It feels quite necessary that I actually keep these rooks on the board. For example, if I end up taking on d3, after bishop takes on d3, he might even go rook to c1, and it feels like his king is a lot more active than mine. And I think that could go quite poorly for me. So I didn't want to allow this. For example, if I go king to f8 and rook to c1, yeah, white's already getting a slight advantage here, which is not great. So yeah, keeping the rooks on the board, just make sure that this rook can't get active via the c file. So that's what I was looking for. So you got rook to d4. I went rook c3, again offering some sort of repetition if he wanted it. He went rook to d3, rook back to c5, and then rook to b3. So I went b6, just making sure that there's no attack on the b pawn. There's no reason to allow this. a4, a5 isn't really too scary either. We can always just win the pawn. And even then, if he goes rook c3 after, even if we trade a pair of rooks after winning a pawn, that's a different situation, right? So f4, I went g6. And I was quite scared of moves like h3 here. Because I was kind of concerned that after h3, h5, and like maybe some sort of like rook g1 or something, or like g3, and then like just some remaneuvering somehow to play g4. Yeah, for some reason, I was incredibly scared here. In hindsight, this is nothing at all. g4 doesn't get to be played so easily. So I'm totally fine. But yeah, bishop to d3, king to f8, and then rook to a1. So their idea is a4, a5 here. So I go rook 8 to c7 just in preparation for a4 and a5. And you might notice something, that I did have potentially one move, but I wanted to wait for it. So after a4, now it's time to play it. It's the move d4, with the idea that we're actually going to be trading some stuff off. After e takes on d4, I take on b3, and then he takes on c5, where after rook takes on c5, now a5 is actually prevented, which is nice, right? Like if they play a5, I'll happily take it with the rook. For example, let's just play it. I think I could probably take with the pawn as well, but something like this doesn't look so bad for me. I'd be pretty happy to see it because I think this is absolutely holdable. Worst case scenario, I could just play something like a4, for example. And then if they ever try trading off, then it would just end up, I believe, just in a completely losing king and pawn ending, like a king c3, a4, king b4, Let's not even pretend that there's a5 stuff, which maybe there is. And then I go king e7. I guess they can go g4. And then like king e6 or something. But again, the whole point is I want to show this bishop to b5 move. Let's just go f6. Takes. Bishop to b5. Yeah, there we go. Now g5. You don't even have to take it yet. Like, just because this is just the wrong plan, right? Because anything like this looks like it might be okay at first, but this is just too much, right? There's two pawns on opposite sides of the board. But of course, I feel like this is kind of obvious, but I just still feel like I would need to mention it because this, I believe, was my thought during the game. Is just that I wouldn't be worried about anything like that. So king e7, rook to a3 was played. I played bishop to d5. I thought this was a bit better of a move because if I go back to e6, I'm worried about f5 with tempo. So yeah, bishop to d5 was a way to maneuver to c6 while also avoiding f5. He went king e3. I went bishop to c6. Again, just saying, hey, if you ever push, I'm happy to take, and we can reach those endgames, which are obviously going to be fine for me. Then we see h4, and I go h6. And I went h6 because I was just a little bit worried either of g5 coming, followed by h5, and either h6 or taking, where all my pawns are kind of on light squares. So h6 was a way to just start getting pawns on the dark squares because we have light square bishops. And if, for example, everything here gets traded off and we are left with the light square bishops on the board, these could be a target in the future. And I didn't want to allow that. So h6 was like, if they play h5, obviously I will take it, but then also this pawn won't be stuck on this color square. For example, h5, I'm not sure if I would want to take it. I mean, maybe I can now because I could play h6 after, but these things were just a big consideration for me. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have too many light squared pawns on this side of the board. So yeah, that's why h6. And then bishop to b5 was played. And I spent a bit of time here thinking, can I hold this ending with bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and then rook takes a7? And I came to the conclusion that I think I can. And I think that was right. Maybe there is just better options like bishop to b7. Maybe it was just a bit too much. But I don't know. It felt right to take on b5. So that's what I did. After bishop takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes b5, and rook a7, I came dangerously close to losing this, by the way, in this position. Because after rook to a4, I played rook to b1, and then he played rook to d4. And what I noticed was going to happen was eventually, most likely, f5 will be played. And he's going to try to win this pawn. So I continued on with my plan. Rook d6 check, king e7, and then f5. So I got to be a little bit careful here because if I take, h6 is hanging. And if I play h5 at the end, he can either play f6 check or he can go rook h6 and then f6 check, where this pawn might just drop. And his king is really close to defending against the b pawn, so that's not great. This is a bad construction, I think, for me. So this is where you got to start delivering checks because you might notice that f5 does weaken a very, very important pawn. And that important pawn is the e5 pawn. So by delivering checks, starting with rook e1, the goal is, can we end up taking this pawn on e5? And, or can they run away from it? And they came up with a really clever idea. So it started with king f4, rook to f1 check, king to e4, rook e1 check, and then king to d5. So it's like, okay, time to be incredibly careful because I want to play rook d1 check, but I think the better move is to just throw this in because we want to, generally when you're defending, our king is worse here, by the way, right? Our king on e7 is incredibly inactive. We're in a defensive stance. And I'm playing against a stronger player, so of course I'm thinking defensively. I can't help it. So by taking on f5 and reducing the amount of pawns on the board, the goal is that our defensive job becomes easier because there's less possible pawns, first, that we could blunder, or that we're just like worried about, where we're worried about different things. When the lines open up and the pawns get traded, there's less pawns to promote. So G takes F5, and now Rook D1 check. And here I was thinking, okay, yeah, I can maybe take on C5. And there is some circumstances where taking on C5 would win. For example, King C5, or King C5, Rook takes D6. My apologies, not King C5. Where they take on D6 and King D7, this is just completely winning. I don't think we even need to calculate this. You would know immediately by looking at this that this is winning for black because white is too far away. Black is at least picking up this pawn. There's no way for white to get around to defend it. And not only that, but they're likely winning this pawn as well. So yeah, it's just game over for white. But of course, they won't do that. They're stronger than that. They're going to play the proper move, King C6. And I was so ready to take on D6 until I realized, oh no, after King to D8, they can take on B5, and then King D7, King C5. And I'm losing because they're defending this pawn. They're up a pawn in the king and pawn ending. This is just really bad. So yeah, I can't do that. So instead here, I go Rook C1 check. And luckily this works out. And the reason why it works out, and this is what I meant of I was dangerously close to losing, is I spotted this resource finally, that Rook C1 check, they take on B5, and they're going to have a really difficult job of defending both E5 and H4. So after King takes B5, I shouldn't try defending H6 with something like H5. I should go on the counter attack with Rook to E1. And now either E5 or H4 is just going to drop. So F6 was played, which I think was a smart idea. The whole point here is that, again, if they take here and I take on E5, they're so far away. And also, I do get to take this pawn. This is a draw. I'm very confident that this is able to be held by me. This doesn't look that difficult at all. I could just bring my king over to G7, and there's really nothing to do. I just make sure I don't lose my F pawn. So I just keep shuffling my rook here. Yeah. So super easy to hold this. Generally, rook pawn positions are easy to hold, even if I didn't have an F pawn. This would be totally fine for me. So yeah, F6 was really smart with the idea that my king will have back rank issues, and he'll also have potential ideas of either going to F8 or to E7. So I have to be very, very careful here. But remember that when you're in a defensive position, you're okay with repeating. And this is something that I had to get over because earlier on in my chess career, I guess, there'd be equal positions that I would try to fight on where I should not be trying to fight on. And this is kind of one of those positions because, for example, after first Rook D5 was played, and then I go Rook H1, this is the point where if they want to defend here, they can go Rook to D4, but then I go back to E1 and they have to make a decision. Which pawn are you going to drop? You don't get to keep both. And I don't want to go, for example, if Rook to D5, I don't really want to go Rook E4 because after H5 and then like Rook H4, it just feels the tempo too slow. So I wanted to just keep repeating the position. King to C6 was played. So I ended up taking on H4. And this looks incredibly scary, but I think that it's actually totally fine. So Rook C4 check is necessary. We need to make sure that white doesn't have the ability to checkmate us, because right now there's a mate of threat. No, there's a threat of mate with Rook to A8 check. So Rook C4 or Rook D4 does work as well. For Rook C4 check, with the idea that after King D5, we can just go Rook C1. And actually, it turns out that Rook C1 is fine. We don't have to go Rook C8 and go passive. We can stay active here. If you have the choice between both of them, you should always look at the active choice. So the whole point here is that after Rook A8 check and King D7, they can go Rook A7 check as well, King back to E8. And if they ever go Rook E7 check, we just go King F8. And this looks really scary. But after something like Rook to A7, we just go back. We're not actually worried of anything here. Rook E7, King F8, like if they can magically play rook a7 and a8 in the same move, then they'd be okay. But because they have to wait for our move as well, we're okay. Rook a8 check, king d7, and then rook f8 check was played. Or not check, but rook f8 was played. And now we only have one defensive idea, which is to get to e6. But we have to be careful on how we do it. So after rook d1 check, king e4, it feels really tempting to go king e6 immediately. But this is really bad because after rook e8 check, king d7, rook e7 check, all of a sudden they're winning f7 and winning the game because they have both of these pawns defended or defending each other. This h pawn, it may or may not fall, but their king is active. This just why blunder a pawn? We don't even need to explain more than that. So the idea here is that after rook d1 check, if they go king e4, we have to just keep delivering checks until they go back even further, and now we can move up the board. We don't even have to go rook takes e5, by the way. We could even just go king e6, which is actually something we'll see. So rook d1 check, king c4 was played, and then I play king e6. And again, we're in another one of those positions where no matter what type of check or what type of attack they make, there's a really good defense for it, and it takes them 2 moves to change to the different type of attack. So we have, or one move to make the threat, and then the second move to activate that threat. You'll see what I mean. So rook e8 check, this king f5. So they could go rook e7 here, right? Where we don't have king e6 anymore, but we have king g6. So anytime they try to make the threat on this pawn and then avoid it or whatever, and then when we avoid it, we're automatically going to be in a position where we can defend against the threat. So rook e7 here, now king g6. This is the idea. They go king c5, and I just start pushing the h-pawn, which is just a very clear way to finish the game. So after rook e8, I go h4, and rook h8, king to f5, and they offered a draw, and I accepted. So should I have accepted the draw? Probably not, because after rook takes on h4, king takes on e5, I am the only one pushing. This pawn is going to drop. I'm in a better position here, but from what I knew, that this was a draw, and I was pretty confident that they could hold it. Also, my game the previous night lasted until about midnight. This was an early game. This was like 9 in the morning or something like that. By the way, this was like an hour drive as well. So I went to sleep around like 1:30, had to wake up at like 7:37, something like this, just to make it and to make sure I wasn't dealing with traffic. So is the energy thing an excuse either? I think it's a reason, not an excuse. I think my energy is poor, or was poor at the time. So this is something that kind of has to be mentioned. So not really the best decision, but I think it was because I had horrible energy at the time. But yeah, after king takes e5, this pawn will drop, and yeah, we can try pushing, but I feel like the defense shouldn't be too hard. But again, how often do you have a chance to push against an international master, right? So yeah, overall, pretty good game by me. Super lucky. I went down into prep. I think I was finally out of prep after rook to d1, by the way. This was all prep for me. This bishop not bishop d3, sorry. Bishop d3 here, instead of rook to d1. This was the line that I knew from the course. But knight takes b3 is a good response against most things. So that's why against rook d1 I was still kind of fine. Whereas I don't know where my opponent's preparation ended. I don't think he was comfortable here from what I understood. So yeah, I think I was a good like 10 or so minutes up on the clock, maybe a bit more actually. I'm not 100% sure, but quite a bit up on the clock at this point. So I'm sure that the preparation ended maybe around e5. If I had to go back, it's a bit of an early spot, but this does feel natural. But when you see this move knight c6, and if you know this stuff and you prepare it, then I feel like you probably wouldn't want to go down this path as white, just because black does have a very slight edge. And if you're playing as white, there's so many lines you can play that are equal. So anyways, that was it. I hope you guys enjoyed the analysis of this game. Just making sure that my mic wasn't muted. I've done that before. Uh, but yeah, happy to be back making videos. I'm just gonna make them now. I'm just gonna make them, and hopefully they'll be better because of that. Because I just wanna make things again. So no more crazy videos. If I want to do something crazy, that's what the other channel was for. This was supposed to be a second channel, by the way, where I just kind of post videos with minimal editing, and the other channel was supposed to be like animated stuff. And I started animating the video, this one, the tournament game or tournament video. And it was just too much. So that's all. All right. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next tournament game.